Welcome to Terminal B's Bits and Bytes video series. We know IT can sometimes be a bit overwhelming and confusing, so we break things down into bite-sized bits and simplify IT for you. Hello everyone, thank you for joining us on another Terminal B's Bits and Bytes. I am David with Terminal B, and I am here with the owner of Terminal B, Greg Bebo, and today we are going to be talking about 4 critical concepts for security and productivity. Greg, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Excellent, excellent. I'm excited to dig in here. Security as is at an all-time high on the need to do list. Productivity is of utmost importance for any company of any size. So I'd love to get what's in your head out there to the world. So again, we're going to be talking about 4 critical concepts. So take it away, Greg. What's number 1?
Well, the first concept that needs to be understood about managing any network or a series of computers is the concept of a remote management and monitoring. Um, and what is meant by that is, in some cases, it's a software. We use a software to assist with this, but it allows the machines to stay updated and software on the machine to stay updated to make sure that threat actors aren't able to exploit out-of-date systems. That Go ahead.
I was gonna say how I was just gonna ask how do they infiltrate? How does that work? How does that
Well, what
happen?
happens is a lot of times when updates are released, they're security updates, security patches. Windows is a great example of that. They may have realized after they released the version that there's a exploit that's still available, and they may go and patch that. So it's important to stay up to date with patches on the software that you use, and it could be particularly devastating if patches are not applied in a timely manner.
Now, are the activities the same, for taking care of this to making sure you do it? If say you're like a 20 to 50 or 100 sized company versus if you're Ford or GM and you have tens of thousands of employees, what what would you suggest for each of those? Is it the same? Are they
So,
more
so for this,
robust?
so for the smaller companies, it tends to be a matter of elbow grease and system defaults. Um,
Mm-hmm.
as you move up to greater budget for management of systems, there are tools designed to help facilitate how and when to issue patches or updates, and making sure there's visibility to compliance, patch compliance across the organization. Unfortunately, at the lower end, again, it's a matter of elbow grease and system defaults. Like Windows, for example, can be set to automatically update, but a reason you may not choose to do that is it could break something else. So there's typically a delay before patches are released and we apply them just to make sure that it doesn't break things. We go through a vetting process.
So say elbow grease is the only thing you can squeeze out at the current moment, right? What do you mean by that? Like, what would somebody need to be doing on a daily or weekly basis to just make sure they don't get infiltrated and some really bad stuff happens and it costs them a lot of money, if not their business?
At a smaller level or with limited or no budget, I would recommend that firms use the default settings in their applications to automatically update. It may break things, but this way, no one has to go around to all the machines and touch them all to make sure that they're individually patched. And that's where software comes into play, because software can help give you visibility across the organization about what status is on different machines and when to apply those updates.
And do you have any favorite tools that you have found work the best? I mean, again,
The one that we use is called um, oh my goodness, ConnectWise Automate is what we use. Unfortunately, that product is available through channel or available to MSPs only. But there are tools out there that can be used that vary in price based on functionality.
and they can find those by Googling remote management and monitoring.
Yep,
That's
or
that's what
RMM.
RMM.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. Let's go to number 2. What would be the next
So
concept for
the second
productivity and
is
security?
dual factor authentication. What dual factor authentication is something you have and something you know. Those are the two forms of authentication. Something you know tends to be in the form of a password. I know what my password is. Something you have tends to be in the form of a phone, or in early days, it was a fob that would hang off a keychain. And those two together provide the two-factor or dual factor that cuts down significantly on folks exploiting logins to various
Okay.
systems.
Now, again, small, medium, 20, 50, 100, first larger. This almost sounds like across the board. This applies
Yeah, this
for
is
everybody.
not, this is no longer a nice to have. If the only thing standing between bad actors and your mailbox is a password, they will figure it out. So it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when. Adding that thing that you have, which in most cases today is a cell phone, cuts down significantly, because bad actors, no matter where they are in the world, do not have access to your cell phone. It's
Okay.
not foolproof, but it decreases the likelihood of getting hacked that way
What
significantly.
would it make it foolproof if somebody takes your phone and they have your password?
Yeah, I mean, there's ways where they could infiltrate. I mean, it's very advanced, but there are ways where if you're authenticating based on text, then that text could be infiltrated. We use a product that called Duo, or Cisco Duo, that allows us to apply dual factor through an app on your phone that would apply to any login that you might have. Um, Smaller organizations are a little bit more better off in this regard, because things, firms like Microsoft and Google, they have free authentication tools that can be used. The problem comes in is that those tools don't work with every type of login that would be needed. So as a firm grows into a larger budget, they would be looking at a tool that would be able to accommodate all their logins. So users wouldn't have to pick which authentication method is being used, which can get confusing.
I got it. So if an IT person's listening to this and they need to go to their owner and say, if we have, especially if you have off-site people, a lot of people are working remote or travel a lot, you would suggest that, like, grab them by the short hairs and say, get this in place right now. This sounds like something that's an easy to do, but a must have. Is that a fair statement?
It's no longer optional, no. And in fact, there should be no exceptions. Anybody that's using your company domain for email should be forced to use dual factor to ensure that the company is not infiltrated.
Gotcha, gotcha. And what if somebody loses their phone? What happens?
If someone loses their phone, they usually have bigger problems, but their IT department can help, or the firm that they get the software from can help. We've had that happen quite a few times, where you can transfer that authentication mechanism from an old phone to a new one.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, let's keep going. What's the third thing?
The third thing is training. Training has become more and more important these days because of the breadth of software that we're putting in front of employees. It is also very relevant to security. In fact, to the point now where cyber liability insurance is requiring that folks have some method of training for their employees, so that they're not caught off guard by phishing attempts or some kind of scam. Um, just this last week, I heard of 2 instances where folks clicked or rerouted ACH payments based on things that came in through their email. Um, you might
We'll
think,
address that on another. We'll
you
address
might,
that one on another
you
video.
might
That
think it's
sounds like a
because
good story. Go ahead though.
it is, and you might think it's because they didn't have dual factor authentication, but in fact, the firms that I spoke to did have dual factor. It was their vendors upstream that did not. So training allows for another layer. Security training allows for another layer of folks that for folks to say, hey, this doesn't look quite right, and at least take pause before they just automatically take action. And some of these tools actually have plugins that will allow you to, get verification from within Outlook, say, on whether or not an email is legit or suspicious.
Okay. Say you're an IT lead in a company, or it's just your job to make sure this stuff is in place, right? You could potentially be the owner of a company if you're 20 to 30, 40, 50 people. You could be an IT person. And you mentioned the word training. If I'm them and I don't quite know how to freaking train somebody, I am getting a rush of anxiety, knowing I want to do what's best for the company, yet not knowing where to start. How does that work? When you say training, how do people get trained?
Yeah, so there's a myriad of training options that exist for, and this is something that's more accessible to firms of all sizes, where you can enroll in a training portal that would allow you to select the trainings that you feel are most appropriate for your staff.
Okay.
The portal that we use actually allows you to assign training and can allow requirements that people have to score a certain level to pass the exam, and that's all trackable and assignable by us and or the management of the firm. And again, the better tools have plugins so that if something looks suspicious and you clicked on it, uh, that plugin may say, "Hey, this was an attempt to see if you were paying attention, and now you have to go to training because you weren't paying attention."
I know
Um,
a few people who would love that role.
yeah, training purgatory that you got caught, and for the better of the company, we're going to make sure that you know what was done wrong. The
Okay.
other
So,
the other
go
important
ahead.
aspect about this about training is that I talked about the breadth of software. Um, there's more than 800 SKUs for Microsoft 365, and I like to use the example of Microsoft Excel. Most people that use Excel only know how to use maybe 10% of what it's capable of. The training portal allows people to go in and train at their leisure to really become knowledge experts on whatever products they use. And the way that our training's set up, it happens in short bites. So, 2, 3 minute blocks grouped together in sections. So you could have training from all the way from introduction to advanced, depending on the tools that or the software that you're using.
Okay. But before we move on to the last point, if someone's like, okay, you're right. Been putting this off. We really need to train everybody up. Put an order of what you would say, do this first, do this next, do this next. What would you say?
For training,
Yes.
for training, I would find again, there's a myriad of options that exist. I would find one that fits the budget.
No, no,
And
no. What,
if
what, what, like security, dual factor authentication. What would you, if you were to put these in order for somebody who's like, okay, I really need to train the staff up, where would you start? What would be the very first thing you would train on, and then the subsequent next couple points?
Security
Security
awareness
awareness.
for sure. Yep. In fact, that is what your insurance company would most like to hear as well. That users don't just rely on things getting filtered, that they're able to look and be able to tell roughly what red flags are in their email box, or
On
being
that note,
aware.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, or being aware of what to look out for and where threats may appear.
Now, my understanding is, not to belabor this too much, but you mentioned insurance companies. If I'm not mistaken, look into this. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, so people don't, waste their time. But you get insurance breaks if you have certain things in place. Is that correct, or am I
Yeah,
misremembering
but
that?
but we're moving into a period where you're not going to get coverage if you don't have certain things.
Okay, so it
So
is.
security awareness training is becoming standard in cyber liability insurance. That if you're not unwilling to demonstrate that your staff is trained and has the ability to train, then in some cases you won't qualify for insurance.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the last concept here under security and productivity. What do you
Sure.
got for us?
So the last one's called EDR, or emergency detection, or excuse me, endpoint detection and response. And what this deals with is, this has evolved over time. This used to be what we called antivirus. Antivirus it's not dead. It still serves a purpose, but it's not as effective as flagging and curbing threats. Antivirus depends on definitions that are published and pushed out to the systems. And by the time those definitions reach the systems, in some cases, it's too late. So we've evolved into something that's called EDR, and EDRs actually sit on machines similar to antivirus, but they're actually looking for activity on the machines that is abnormal, processes that are running, and so on and so forth. Furthermore, good EDR products are monitored 24/7 with a SOC, a Security Operations Center, that can take action should any suspicious activity be included or be identified on a system.
Now that sounds expensive. I don't know if it is or isn't, but at the very minimum, it sounds important. And I'm going to ask this again because I know people are, on different journeys with their company and you know, growing and or mature. Is it the same methodology and the same tools that you would use for a 20 to 50 to 100 or, the
So
10,000
this
pluses of
one,
the world?
this does require more of a commitment on behalf of the organization, both financially and administratively, because you have to set up policies to define what's okay and what's not okay. And furthermore, you have to be available should suspicious activity appear. Um, Again, this is actually something that is not optional with insurance companies to be underwritten for cyber liability, excuse me. They're not looking for antivirus anymore. That does not check the box. They are looking for EDR because antivirus, it just does not satisfy the security um, purpose it was originally set out to. Things have evolved to the point now where antivirus is just not enough. So anybody that's looking for a security policy is going to get asked by their insurance agency before they're underwritten, do you have training? Do you use dual factor authentication? Do you have an EDR? And are your systems patched? How are your systems patched? Insurance companies are very interested before they'll underwrite, which makes management very interested to make sure that those tools are in place. There are ways to navigate that. As a smaller organization, it does require more elbow grease, but there are definitely ways to do that. But as you grow into a larger budget, there are tools that help facilitate those efforts.
And any guidance? And again, I don't know if there's a difference here or not, but for small, medium-sized businesses for versus, medium to large, do you have any suggestions on pointing people for the proper EDR solutions?
It's the same thing holds true. It's going to seem cost prohibitive for small organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Especially if the service is monitored 24/7. So that's something that you might grow into as your budget increases. Um, I would say, in terms of priorities on the four tools that we've mentioned, dual factor authentication should have been done yesterday. Those tools are free. If you're using Google for email, it's free. If you're using Microsoft 365, it's free. And so that needs to be turned on for as many applications as possible within the organization, because that is going to that's going to cut down significantly on threat actors being able to infiltrate the organization at any level. I would say the next is probably training. Another cost-effective one, because even software does not solve all problems. And when security now is a exercise in human engineering, having the knowledge of what people are looking for and how they might catch you off guard and where the organization might be vulnerable is extraordinarily valuable. And we've seen this because insurance companies are starting to ask as well. The next would be, I would say, EDR and RMM. RMM can be done automatically to some extent. If you have default tools that are in the software that you use, it could be done with a little elbow grease. The last layer, I think, is the EDR,
Okay.
because that requires a level of expertise on the systems and the monitoring. It's more of a commitment for an organization to go in that direction.
Gotcha. Well, I think that's a wrap. Even though I worked for you and for MSP, I learned something today. So and I hope everybody else did out there as well. Like we have said many times, IT can be very complicated, can be very confusing. Sometimes you don't know up from down. So hopefully you learned something today, and feel free to check out some of our other videos as we'll be digging into some other topics that will help you out as well. Thank you very much. Thank you, Greg.